sins. I wanted to share with everyone. It's a small book in volume, but great in meanings, and we won't be able to cover it in the next 45 minutes or so, but just some of the benefits that are mentioned in this important subject, which is something that we all seek, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who have it, because this is one of the means for a person to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you can explain the entire deen of Islam from that perspective, which is husn al-khuluq. Husn al-khuluq, good manners. You can talk about any aspect of the deen from the perspective of the good manners, because the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically good manners with the creator of the heavens and the earth subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who disbelieve in Allah, those who associate partners with Allah, those who disobey Allah, and it's all levels, of course. It's all signs of bad manners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator, the provider, the owner of all things, and with all of this, still people turn away from their creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, disbelieving in Him, worshipping other than Allah, disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the good manners is really not what people define of good manners. It's much more deeper than that. It's something that is the purpose of our life, is to attain this, is to willingly have the best manners ever. And al-khuluq, since in the Arabic language this is a sajiyya, that means this is the norm of the person. He acquires it and he's patient upon it till it becomes his norm. And this is how the entire life should be when it comes to the oneness of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same thing with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, to follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. If you have an elder, if you have a parent, and you are living with your parent, or you have someone that you respect, if you are in a gathering, before you leave, you take permission from those who is the elder, from the one. If you are in a session of knowledge, if you're sitting like this, you know, if someone wants to leave, one of the etiquettes that we learn from the deen of Allah is that a person would seek permission even with a hand gesture and then leave, for example. And you imagine the Prophet ﷺ, the one that has more rights on us than our own families and our own selves. How can we even do something without seeking that permission, meaning without knowing whether we are following him or not? Because we are commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to follow the Prophet ﷺ in every aspect. So to follow the Prophet ﷺ, not just in the deeni things, as some people call it deeni, and then we start classifying what's deeni and what's not deeni. Everything is deen. The entire life is deen. So whether it's ibadah or belief, or dealing with others, or dealing with one another, or relationships, or money, or jobs, everything is deen. And we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example, and one of which is the khuluq. We keep on talking about how the Prophet ﷺ had the best akhlaq. But then when it comes to dealing with people, right, which is only one aspect of husn al-khuluq. But we find, some of us, we would find that it's easy to have husn al-khuluq in tawheed, in this action, you know, versus something else. But when it comes to dealing with one another, for example, no, everybody goes back to their own habits and the way that they were raised and how their parents taught them and things like this, without changing ourselves to imitate the ways of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore we in need of that knowledge. We need to know the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ, not just in ideal terms, but to understand it, to comprehend it, to know exactly how to deal with these types of matters. But we have to prepare ourselves that we have to struggle with ourselves. It's not going to be easy. Right? If the Prophet ﷺ said to Shaj ibn Abdul Qais that inna fika khaslatan yuhibbuhum Allah wa rasuluh, you have two qualities that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam loves. That means Allah created you with these two qualities. It's been made easy for you. Al-hilm wal-ana. That He has hilm, He has forbearance, and al-ana, that means He takes His time. He's not rushing. He's not in haste to speak. He's not in haste to make decisions. He's not in haste to dispute with people. He takes His time. before he make a judgment, before he make a decision. So these two qualities, it's something that is part of the deen. But for some people, this is something that can be already in them, so it's easy for them. But for other people, they might not have it. They're not raised to be like this. But this is part of your deen. That means you have to put the effort to have it. And no excuse to say, well, this is not how I was raised. This is this or that, because this is part of the deen. And the same thing with everything else. But unfortunately, we have some vague ideas of what al-akhlaq is. Just titles of things. Al-hilm, forbearance, sabr, to be generous, to be like this, words that everybody in the whole world can understand and can relate to. But we need to be more than what is in the fitrah of every human being. We need to get to know what is unique in this deen and what is specific when it comes to our life following the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So if we can get from this short period of time that we need to take this subject serious, how to learn al-akhlaq, and we treat ourselves that we don't have akhlaq. It's okay to be like this, right? We don't have any akhlaq, so therefore we need to seek the knowledge of how to have akhlaq. So start from the very beginning, right? And this is how every aspect of the deen, we need to always revive these meanings in ourselves. And again, as we said, sometimes you have to step on your pride. Sometimes you have to have a fatwa, right? Fatwa is not just in transactions and this and that. Fatwa is to ask a alim, a brother in the masjid said that to me or did this to me. Should I punch him in the face, or should I smile to him, or should I forgive him, or should I not forgive him? Well, this is deen. And it's not going to be always that the people of knowledge would say, forgive your brother. It doesn't have to be that way. And that's why sometimes it's confusing, because you want to see what's the outcome to be benefiting one. So many people, they don't ask the people of knowledge this. They only ask them, is it halal to eat dhabiha or not? Which is, mashallah, is good. Is it halal, this contract is perfect, mashallah, and we should ask. But also to ask about how to enter Jannah, how to protect myself from the hellfire, how to purify my heart, how to have the fear of Allah in our hearts. This is valid questions. And when we look at the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, how they used to ask the Prophet sallallahu man najah, how to be saved, O Prophet of Allah. Things like this. Until the day of judgment, the Ummah would learn. So the truthfulness in our heart that should be there like this, how to be guided, the love of guidance, the love of, and to be ready to accept any matter of change. And this is what makes a believer humble and not arrogant. So arrogance is one of the things that prevents the person from entering the Jannah of Allah. So to humble ourselves is to be ready to accept the truth, because we are in need of it, ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, and to apply it. So there is a risala, small book, it's called Husn al-Khuluq. So it says Husn al-Khuluq, it's very summarized version, I'm not sure if translated, but we can go through some of the benefits, we won't be able to cover it, and it's to leave ourselves with a book, a reference that we can always return back to. And it depends on how that book is explained, even though it's in few pages. You can explain it in a session, or you can get every sentence and go back to the evidences and explore more and see what the Quran says about this and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and situations that the Prophet ﷺ faced. And that's one of the importance of studying the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, with the intention not just to have a nice talk and we hear things and that's it, but with intentions in our heart, how can I be upon this? Even if you're alone, it doesn't matter, that we have to be living with the most righteous people to show our good manners. Good manners is put in under the test, whether we are in good environment, bad environment, and so on. Yusuf alayhi salam, the people in prison, which is always something that amazes anybody that reads this ayah. What did they see from Yusuf alayhi salam that they said to him when they asked him for the interpretation of the dream? They said, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin. We see you from the muhsinin. How did they see that he is from the good doers? What did they see from him that he is from the good doers? And see, and he's someone that has, according to the terms of nowadays people, a miserable life. That other people in his situation, they would have fallen into some mental illness. If they go through what Yusuf alayhi salam went through, they would leave the entire deen of Allah. If they go to some of the things that Yusuf alayhi salam went through, And with all of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed us such a great example. So it's feasible for someone to face trials and difficulties in this life and to be among the best of manners and to be in the worst environment, the environment when he was in the house of Al-Aziz with all of these women and these things, right? And he was such a good doer in that environment. In the environment of the prison, where it's usually people, maybe criminals and things like this. Such a great example. And then when he became in charge and he was living among disbelievers. So this is an example to see prophets of Allah, and of course we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example. So this is a long introduction, but we won't again finish the entire book. But after saying the introduction, he said, I won't read the Arabic and the English so much, otherwise we won't have enough time. But he starts with how many you would find in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, min al-nusus, from the text that encourage us to have husnul khuluq, that praises the people of husnul khuluq, of the people of good manners, that talks about its virtue and so on. So this is something that is not one verse here or there. There's so much abundance in this because it has so much great benefits and it's part of our deen, and that means we have to put the effort to be upon it. And again, I want to re-saying this again. When it comes to manners, many of us is the way that we are when we were young or how we were raised. We continue to be the way that our parents raised us or the way that our backgrounds and our culture or whatever there is. So you find the one that always gets angry and acts foolish when he's angry, he was like this when he was young and he continued to be like this. And someone is greedy, he continued to be greedy. And this is not what the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all about. We have to put the effort to apply what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And that's why one of the great benefit of talking about the subject and being upon it is imtithalu amrillahi wa rasul. Why we want to have good manners is not because people to like us and to have a goodly life. This is because to obey the commands of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is what the entire life is for the believers, to be obedient to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, والاقتداء بخلق النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and to follow the manners of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. And where is that in the ummah of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام? That there are examples of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام imitating him عليه الصلاة والسلام in all aspects. And this in itself, so this is meaning that we need to remember. Another thing is وأنه في نفسي عبادة عظيمة. To have حسن الخلق in itself is a great ibadah, worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says تتناول من زمان العبد وقتا طويلا. It takes a long period of time. It's not salah that you finish in 2-3 minutes and that's it. This is a long, it's the life of the believers. For example, if we talk about حسن الخلق with your wife, right? We have to have حسن الخلق with our wives, the wife with her husband. How many hours in a day that you spend with your wife? Multiply that by 7 to be in a week, in a month, in your entire life. So you have a huge amount of time that comes in the Day of Judgment. Either is going to be a reward of a great ibadah, or a punishment, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, or a sinful thing, or it's waste. But there's nothing is waste, it's either or actually. And it doesn't have to be that you're sitting with your wife making dhikr, right? This is by itself, the relationship in itself, she's a test for you and you're a test for her. Even in the things that you would fulfill your desires doing, it's part of the deen. And the same thing when it comes to your brothers, and how much hours or minutes or by years that you spend this with your brother in the masjid. You've been known each other for 20 years, right? How many years of that you had spent with him if you collect all the minutes every day? You meet people every salah, for example, and you see and you do this for over years. And then this is all ibadah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will either reward or punish. And it doesn't have to be that he is kind, so I'm kind. It's ibadah. You're responsible for your actions, and he's responsible for his own actions. If he doesn't do his job, you're still going to be asked about how did you then fulfill his rights when he did not fulfill your rights. So it's a complicated issue. Yes, if it's away from the ilm, if it's away from the Quran and the Sunnah, it's very complicated. But when we get to know it from the deen of Allah, then it becomes very clear. Difficult, yes, in some situations it's more difficult than to make salah. It's easy to make salah. But it's not easy to humble yourself when you yourself want to do something else. It's for some people to be abstained from ghiba is far worse than to abstain from anything that is more difficult, and so on. So the issue that it's ibadah, it takes a long time, and it's one of the easy ways also to gain a great reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said in the beginning some of the benefits to get us excited to really be upon this. أنه يحبب صاحبه للقريب والبعيد. It makes you loved by those who are close and those who are far from you. ويجعل العدو صديقا, makes your enemy, not all of the enemies, but makes your enemy a friend, and the one that is far to make him close to you. And الداعي إلى الله, if you call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it blesses the da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam by saying, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. It is by the mercy of Allah that you لِنْتَ لَهُمْ, that you become soft towards them. It's by the mercy of Allah. Even the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, the best of all of the human beings, it's by the mercy of Allah. So this is another aspect, that for us to have good manners is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us good manners. And there's a dua that people always mention when they look at the mirror. It's weak narration when it comes to looking at the mirror, but it's an authentic narration when it comes as a general dua. The dua is, Allahumma hassin khuluqi kama hassanta khalqi. This is always mentioned in some of the books of adhkar. This is what you say when you look at yourself in the mirror. But it's weak as far as when you look at yourself in the mirror. But it's authentic. The Prophet ﷺ used to say that dua in general. So, Allahumma hassin khuluqi. Oh Allah, hassin, make perfect my khuluq, my manners, the same way that you perfected my looks. Right? And everybody, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected their image and their looks. So there's no one ugly. This is human ignorance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation is perfect. He created you perfectly to what you are for, to the objective of your life. And one of which, if someone doesn't look pleasant to others, this is perfectly the wisdom of Allah, so that you are tested by that. It is meant to be this way, and they are tested by you, and so on. So فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ, by the mercy of Allah. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. And if you are فَض, غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ. Al-fadh is the one that is repel people. He frown his face. He's not pleasant. He's not soft with people, and his heart is harsh towards them. لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. They would disperse from you, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Which is, if that's to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam, we can imagine what happens to other than the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. So then he says, and this is the husnul khuluq by itself, is ihsan, is goodness, that is more than just the financial ihsan. You know, we always think of, for you to be kind to others, you give money, you give sadaqah. This is also, you add to this, that this can be even more than giving sadaqah to people. The husnul khuluq. As the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a beautiful hadith. إنكم لن تسعوا الناس بأموالكم إنكم لن تسعوا الناس بأموالكم ولكن ليسعهم منكم حسن الخلق. You won't be able to comprehend. السعة is when you have something spacious. You won't be able to contain people with your wealth. You won't be able to be, people will not like you because you don't have that much wealth that you would give to people. When you give someone something, a gift or something, that's one of the means to soften their hearts. So you won't be able to do that with your wealth. ولكن, but then ليسعهم منكم حسن الخلق. Let حسن الخلق from you contain everyone. So this is feasible. You can contain everyone with your good manners. You can contain them all. It's not by lying. It's not by deceiving them and hating them, but I'm just going to pretend. No, by the true husn al-khuluq, a person can contain everyone without compromising the deen, because again, this is ilm. Why we have to say ilm over and over again? Because if it's left to ourselves, a person might think that husn al-khuluq is to compromise the deen so that people don't get upset with me. And they would be pleased with me and they would love me so much if I do whatever they're doing of evil things. No, this is not husn al-khuluq, this is bad manners. Because we have foundations that should never be contradicted, seeking the pleasure of Allah and so on, and no disobedience to Allah. But then if you see that people won't like you because if you're obedient to Allah, that means you have to even put more effort with husn al-khuluq because they already won't like you. So you still have to put so much effort, and that's why the enemies of the believers, if they are fair, they should be seeing in the believers, even though they hate them so much, but they would never catch any bad manners from them. They would see that they have good manners, and if they are fair, if they're not lying and so on. So beautiful hadith, إنكم لن تسعوا الناس بأموالكم. You won't be able to comprehend or contain the people with your wealth. ولكن ليسعهم منكم حسن الخلق. Let حسن الخلق then be the thing that would be able to bring the hearts together and things like this. If a person has both, mashallah, this is perfect over perfect. If he can be generous with his wealth and with his manners, and as he said, وَمَتَى فُقِدَ الْإِحْسَانُ الْمَالِيِّ نَابَ عَنْهُ حُسْنُ الْخُلُقِ. And if he does not have the financial ihsan to others, then with حُسْنُ الْخُلُقِ, this has much more effect than anything else. And also with the good manners, and that brings the tuma'nina, the contentment of the heart, and the person would have good heart as a result of this. It would make it easy for him to attain the knowledge that he needs to be upon it. And he, which is basically even when people are dealing with one another, when people carry grudges, when they have bad manners, they're not able to see things. They become blind. All they think of is how to be victorious, how to defeat others, how to this and that. They're not able to be fair whatsoever. So this is one of the evil things, the consequences of having bad manners. And that's why a-rifq or gentleness is something that you would find many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ that calls us to have rifq, gentleness, to be gentle in all of our affairs. And the opposite of a-rifq is al-unf, or what's al-unf? Aggression. Now, the opposite of a-rifq is aggression. When a person is aggressive, the opposite of that is gentleness. Right? إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُعْطِي عَلَى الرِّفْقِ مَا لَا يُعْطِي عَلَى الْعُنْفِ. Allah gives as a result of gentleness what He doesn't give on aggression. You think that if you physically do something, you achieve a result. No, with gentleness, you can go far beyond that when it comes to attaining goodness. Also the evil of being in haste. And this is especially at times of fitan. Especially at times of fitan, tribulations and things like this. One of the worst things that a person would want to be upon is to be in haste in things. Because one word that you might be in haste saying, or one decision, it can ruin a person and makes it very difficult for him to go back again to fix what he did, because it's times of fitan. And a very clear example nowadays, if you are on the internet or social media, right, if you write something at a moment of anger, or you share something at a moment of a person is just not paying attention to what he's saying or what he's doing, and he just send it, right, and that's too late if he regrets it, because it went to the east and the west. And then it can go through years and years, Allah knows best. You cannot bring it back. It's done. That's how fitan is. You cannot say, I'm sorry. It's too late. So it's, things like, yes, of course a person should still repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this tu'ada is mentioned even in the statements of the earlier generations of Islam. And how they warned people at the times of fitan to be in haste. And a time would come, or as more than one from the early generations of Islam, they said that there used to be a time, meaning at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, at the time of good environment, that خيركم في دينه المتسارع. The best among you in his deen is al-mutasari', the one that is in haste. Like وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ, be in haste and forgiveness from Allah. And a time would come that خيركم في دينه المتأني. A time would come that the best among you in his religion is al-muta'anni, the one that does not be in haste. Think it over before you say anything, before you do anything. At certain, this is the later generations, they should have more of this. And it doesn't mean, again, it all goes together. It doesn't mean that a person becomes a coward or so, but to make sure that things are done in the right way and not to rush. And this is part of husn al-khuluq. Also fulfilling the rights, it happens by husn al-khuluq. You have many rights, obligatory rights, recommended rights to one's family, one's children, one's relatives, friends, brothers for the sake of Allah, people that you see in the masjid, workers. All of these rights can be easily ignored and wasted as a result of bad manners. And with good manners, all of these rights will be observed. And also, a great quality is al-insaf, to be fair. A person, if he doesn't have husn al-khuluq, it's very difficult to be fair, as we mentioned before. Why? Because he always wants to make himself victorious. It doesn't matter if he's right or wrong, he just doesn't want to be defeated. And we help sometimes those who want to be of bad manners when we don't help people for them to accept them when they apologize or when they regret what they did. We look down upon someone says, I was wrong when I did this. This is a reality. That means every time he do something, or maybe he would regret it again. They used to be in matters of ilm. Like Imam Malik and others, they would say things in their gatherings of people from the east and the west listening to them. And they would say something, and then the next day he say, I said what I said and I was wrong. Someone would correct him and he would say, I was wrong. To the mala like this, to the extent of which that we have it in the books today. And that elevated their levels, not the opposite. Because when people think of anyone as being someone that is perfect, it does not exist on the face of earth. And people think that way if it's someone, a person of knowledge or someone like that means he doesn't make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but we have to also help others, to be able to say that they did what is wrong and they regret to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what they did and so on. So to be fair, this is also one of the things that a person lose, or this is one a person gain with matters of good manners. It's the goodly life of this life and the rewards in the hereafter. And that's why the one that has bad manners is always miserable in this matter. And he talks about many of these evidences as a result of this. But then, because of the time, even though this is what we need the most, what would help us to be upon husn al-khuluq? And we skipped a huge part. Is what is husn al-khuluq? This is a detailed subject, right? And that need requires for us to learn it and to have the patience to learn it. And reading the Quran and reading the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and so on. But what helps the person to at least be concerned about this matter and to be upon beautiful manners is to get to know these benefits. And the more we see it as such an important thing and it's part of our deen, the more that it becomes easy. As it's also said, إِذَا رَغِبَ الْعَبْدُ فِي شَيْءٍ. What's the end of the sentence? If you zeal something, if you want something, really, قَدُرَ عَلَيْهِ. If you want something, you'll be able to do it. You'll have the power to do it. Right? So whoever says, I'm not able to, it's so difficult for me, because you don't want to. If you want whatever you sincerely you want something, and it's in the capacity of the human, especially like when something that Allah commanded us, that means it's in the capacity of everyone. But you see, I'm not able to get up for Salatul Fajr. It's very difficult for me. It's very difficult for me to pray the night prayer. It's very difficult for me to forgive when forgiveness is a good thing for you in a specific situation. I'm not able to. If you have the zeal for it, you'll be able to do it. But maybe there's the lack in the zeal and the desire. So that's why we need to increase that desire by getting to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So all the difficulties will be removed. And that's why the highest level of zeal for the believers is the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know the virtues of husn al-khuluq. And the more the person sacrifice in this life, the greater rewards is. But sacrifice not for the sake of sacrifice, but sacrifice to be upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And al-ihtisab and seeking rewards from Allah and so on. He says, وَمِنْ أَعْظَمِ أَسْبَابِ عُلُوِّ الْهِمَّةِ ورغبة العبد في مكارم الأخلاق وأنها أولى ما اكتسبه أو ما اكتسبته النفوس وأجل غنمها الموفقون فبحسب قوة رغبته في ذلك يسهل عليه نبل. So this is the most greatest mean to achieve the good manners is that a person really want to be a person of good manners, not according to his terms, but according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him. And if a person has that zeal, he would make dua. Do we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us good manners, or we make dua that others have good manners? Right? We have to make dua to Allah that Allah give us good manners. And one of the dua that we heard, and one of which, Allahumma inni nas'aluka al-thabata fil amr wal azimata ala al-rushd. Oh Allah, we ask you to be steadfast upon the matter and to have the determination to be upon righteousness and upon good. And one of these means, which is such an important one, but it might sound very simple and easy, but this is the means to have husn al-khuluq, the tawheed of Allah, of course, to consider that part of the deen, to know that we don't have the knowledge of it till we learn, and to focus on taking the Prophet ﷺ as our example in a real way and form, but also is because we know that this is not going to be overnight. It requires time. So therefore they call it riyadatun nafs. وَمِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ riyadatun nafs. And riyada is the same word as used for exercise. You make riyada, you exercise your body. Your body, you cannot run fast, you cannot jump. Athletes and all of these types of things, they're not born with these abilities, but it takes years and years and efforts and hours for what? For something that is what, dunya, and then after that they get old and they lose it anyway, right? So it doesn't even stay the rest of their life. And the same thing, which is even more important, of course, that it's an everlasting joy. And it's really, you know that, for example, someone, if he works on himself and exercises himself, and he has then husn al-khuluq, it stays with him. He does not lose it when he gets old. It stays with him, and the reward of it is an everlasting one. So it's a very foolish thing for someone to continue to have bad manners and bad qualities when it might take only months and then you're done with it, then you go to something else. This is how the beauty of the deen is, that we have the ability to change any fault in us. But the problem is when we don't see our faults, so what do? Consider that we have all of the faults. Consider when you look at yourself, I have all of the bad qualities in the world. So how am I going to get rid of being stingy and being greedy and being selfish? And how am I going to do this? Then we see the remedies for it in the Quran and the Sunnah. And when you take the remedies for it, you'll be good, inshallah. Even if you're the most generous, if you consider yourself greedy and you apply the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll continue to be generous. It's not going to kill you like someone healthy takes medicine and it kills him. No, when it comes to the deen, you're healthy and you take the medicine for a disease, you become healthier, right? Instead of waiting to figure out what's wrong with us. Whether you have someone that can give you nasiha, which is another thing that we like. Imagine that we're giving nasiha to each other. We would just be fighting all day with each other. We'll boycott one another. Why? Because look at you first before you advise me. Because it's the ego comes out. It's all, really we have a serious problem. All of us, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, except those who Allah have mercy upon. Test yourself when someone comes and give you an advice, a sincere advice of something wrong, right? And of course there's etiquettes of doing so that we don't help the shaitan on our own selves. But this is what the rights of a Muslim is, to advise him, not to rush into boycotting him. Where the effort that we put to advise and to advise ourselves, advising someone like it's your son and if it's a loved one, without even with eliminating completely the disputes and all that, overlook things so that the brothers are together. And this is just one aspect of it. SubhanAllah, one student of knowledge, mashallah, he was, I don't know how to say it without exposing anyone, but he was invited in a place, and when he was in that place, and because of an opinion that he had, which is a valid difference of opinions, by the way, I'm not going to say the details, but take it from trust me in this, inshallah. It's all valid differences of opinions, but when those who invited him, they got to know that he has this opinion, which is a valid difference of opinion, they did not even allow him to speak. It was a very embarrassing thing. So I expected that brother, he would that's it, he leaves, or that's it for them. It was shocking how he was so kind and so pleasant to the brothers, and being as if they did a favor to him, which is really a favor to him. They did not. Why would the person be exposed, and it's more responsibility? But the manners that was observed, really you see the effect of ilm for someone like this. Did not take it personal, and why are they doing this to me because of this or that. It's overlook. You're not going to be able to change people, but we can change ourselves. So to exercise ourselves, that means you fail and then you work on yourself to regain again effort, like when people exercise anything. And sometimes to become extreme with your own self, not bad extremism, till you become upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. Is it time for the adhan? And also, so the exercising, any good manners, this is all general, but once you see you want to exercise hilm, to be forbearance, exercise it, focus on it. You failed the first day, it's okay, exercise it again. You increase your forbearance a little bit more, and keep on being consistent with this, add to it something else, till it becomes your norm. But again, this is with ilm. And that's why when we lack the presence of the people of knowledge to correct us, sometimes a person might fall into some deficiencies here or there. Also, one of these types of things is that the person would remove the things that would, as he says, to remove the things that distract us from this. So to being distracted from having good manners, because life is busy. And it's not something that we think of all the time, that I want to make sure that I have good manners and I practice this, and because of the many distractions in our life. Okay, one last thing, inshallah ta'ala, before we end. He says, فَلَوْ كَانَ الْإِنسَانُ بِكُلِّ نَعِيمٍ وَتَوَفَّرَتْ لَدَيْهِ أَسْبَابُ الرَّاحَةِ وَقَلْبُهُ فِي قَلَقٍ وَحَرَجٍ لَا يَخْرُجُ مِنْ هَمٍّ إِلَّا وَقَعَ فِي آخَرٍ. If a person has all kinds of delightful things and pleasant life physically, and he has all the means, nice house and nice car and everything, but his heart is in qalaq, is always worries and unease, and he goes from one distress to another, and he's not able to enjoy whatever he has, or enjoy the fact that he has a loved one, or things like this. فإنه حتى الآن لم يصل إلى المقصود. He's not able to reach his objective, that the people of even intellectual being, that they always seek, because they always seek first to be content in our hearts first, in their hearts first, and then the physical matters comes and it follows. But to do the opposite without taking care of our hearts, with ruining our hearts, this is not the right way to do it. And that's why we have to always make inaba to Allah, to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to all of our affairs, and with the ibadah of Allah. And he says, وَيُتِمُّونَ ذَلِكَ بِالْحِلْمِ وَحُسْنِ الْخُلُقِ وَحِفْظِ قُلُوبِهِمْ مِنْ كُلِّ مُشَوِّشٍ يُكَدِّرُ عَلَيْهِمْ حَيَاتَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَةِ. You have to be having this forbearance and the good manners, and to protect your heart from anything that would contaminate it, that makes the people not having the pleasant life. And reflect upon the stories of the good people and the early generations of Islam, and what they had in their goodly life, whether they were rich or poor. You would find many great examples in this. Is that then? So, I don't want to take too much of your time, but what's the purpose of all of this? We didn't talk about anything specific. Just the fact that there is something called husnul khuluq that we need to learn, that we have no idea of what is it, right? It's like, for example, you talk about the subject of, if you never learned mawarith before, the laws of inheritance in Islam, right? And you have to learn it, and you have no idea what is it, you start learning it. So this is the same thing when it comes to the akhlaq. So then the next step is that we learn to apply, inshallah ta'ala, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us have this. And the best way to apply this is to go sit with some of the major scholars, which is something that is very difficult nowadays, to see how they learn from the previous generation, and the etiquettes, and how they conduct themselves, and to put ourselves in the right environment. We're not able to do that. We need to create that environment in our masajid, in our homes, the environment of dhikr of Allah, ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the akhlaq of al-ikhlas and sincerity and truthfulness, the nasiha, the concern towards every Muslim, that I really want what is best to my Muslim brother, not that I want to ruin his life. I want the best for him, and to be able to focus so much that I'm going to forgive, I'm going to pardon. We're not talking about enemies of the deen. We're talking about the ones that are, let's start with the ones that are close to us. One's family, the people that you pray with, that the foundation is forgiveness, not the opposite, not justice. And this is for maybe the enemies, but for the brothers, for the sake of Allah, life goes on with pardoning, not with justice. Yes, you have the right to ask for justice, but not for those who are close to you. Right? With justice, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala treats us with justice, what happens? مَا تَرَكَ عَلَيْهَا مِن دَابَّةٍ. No one on the face of earth would be still alive today if we are treated with the justice of Allah. We seek forgiveness from Allah. So why also the same thing with those that we see every day? We have to live with them with forgiveness, with overlooking, with nasiha and so on, and never to leave anything inside and grudges in our hearts, and we seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us, inshallah, and to continue this subject later, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.